They told you that freedom means doing whatever you want. They lied. Real freedom has boundaries. Real life is hidden on the narrow path that most people refuse to take. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Overcomes Empowerment Ministries. I'm Pastor Derek, and I want to thank you for taking the time to stop by and just listen to us today. Overcomes Empowerment Ministries, God has called us to help people achieve victorious lives through Christ Jesus. And we do this by teaching and preaching the principles and truths of God and his kingdom, and encouraging and inspiring people to apply those principles to their lives so that you can see the goodness of God in this life. You ain't got to wait to go to heaven to experience it. You can experience it right here, but it requires us locking into God's way, right? So we teach principles for better living, for godly living, for kingdom living. That's what we do. Today, we're looking at the narrow path, discipline in a world that loves options. Have you ever noticed that the more options we have in life, the more chaos we seem to experience? I know it's a blessing to have a closet full of clothes, right? But have you stood there in your closet for an insane amount of time just trying to figure out what to wear? How much time did you waste sitting there trying to figure out what to wear? What if you only had a few pieces to choose from? I remember hearing Dr. Mike Murdoch. He talked about his wardrobe because anytime you see him, he has the same thing all the time. He wears the same thing all the time. And he said his closet is full of black suits because he always wears black suits. And he said he did this because his time was too valuable to be standing in the closet trying to figure out what to put on. And that's how it is with most of us with our lives. The more options we get, the more chaotic our lives get. In the midst of a limited number of options, things seem to be a little more smoother. It seemed like we got more out of life before social media. Social media provided so many options as far as what to do with our time and our attention. And now we can't seem to focus on anything that we need to do because we're so distracted. We're distracted by our phones. Now, this is exactly what Jesus was talking about. Exactly what he was talking about in Matthew chapter 7. Verses 13 and 14. He says, "Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there be many who go in by it." Verse 14 says, "Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way that leads to life, and there are few who find it." Now hold up, Jesus. Hold up. So broad is the way that leads to destruction, and a whole lot of people find that way. But narrow is the gate and difficult. The difficult way leads to life. See, we think that anytime we get resistance in life, that means that's a way we shouldn't go. And when we live by that mentality, we rob ourselves a lot of times of the opportunity to grow, to get better and everything, to experience that life. And most of us are on the path to destruction because of that broad way. That broad way is throwing us off. That narrow way, that discipline, that intentionality. You know what it is that you're going to focus on, and nothing is going to stop you. Nothing is going to distract you. You think about Jesus. Peter threw a huge distraction at Jesus. A huge distraction. He was telling disciples what he had to suffer and everything. And then Peter was like, no, you can't let that happen to you. right? And he was poured it on. Oh, I'm paraphrasing. You mean a lot to us and all this kind of, we can't have you leaving, can't have you gone. And Jesus says, get thee behind me, Satan. You are an offense unto me. Now, he didn't address Peter directly, but he understood what was going on. Satan was trying to trip him up. He was trying to get him in his feelings about what he was set here to do and become a distraction. See, but Jesus was focused. He was intentional about everything about his life. But we love the broad way, right? We love the comfort of the broad way. Let me do what I want, not what I should, not what I must. We put wants above everything else. We put comfort. Anything that's difficult, it must be wrong. It's difficult to stick with a diet that leads to good health. It's difficult to stick with your mate, just you and that person, and experience a good life. See, most people have that FOMO, fear of missing out. Most people have that fear of missing out. And as soon as we get locked into a decision, immediately right after that, we get distracted by all of these different options that start to present themselves, and we start fearing that we made the wrong decision. You make a decision and stick to it. And now here's the thing that most people don't think about. Most of us don't think before we make a decision. We make rash decisions. We go and just grab somebody to be with and then say, I'm going to get married and stay committed. We never even check the person and see what their views are on commitment, what their views are on the things that we deem important and what they deem important. We never checked anybody. And then we say marriage doesn't work. Marriage doesn't work because you didn't take the time to make the right decision to begin with. And then when you get locked into a decision like marriage, now you blow it up because I married the wrong. Yeah, because you didn't take the time to think ahead of time. If narrow is the way that leads to life and broad is the way that leads to destruction, when you make a decision and all of a sudden options start popping up, or you run into the difficulty of the narrow path, the temptation is to get out of the narrow path. That's the temptation. But what does that temptation do? It robs you of life. You think about the passage that says, there's no temptation that which is taking us that is common to man. But God with every temptation shall provide a way of escape. He says, so that we may endure it. Why do I need to endure a temptation? Because the temptation is not the thing necessarily presented to you. The temptation is what the temptation is bringing to you. It's trying to pull you out of that commitment. It's trying to pull you off that narrow path that leads to life. And we fall for it because that's what falling for the temptation does. We got to say no to the temptation to stay on the path. That's what it's about. Listen, drop a fire emoji in the chat if you're ready to take the narrow path. If you're ready to take a narrow path, drop a fire emoji in the chat. Now he says broad. Broad is the way. Broad is the way that leads to destruction. Now, when we hear destruction, a lot of times we think catastrophic events, an earthquake, a tornado, a fire, or something like that. That's what we think of when we think about destruction or something being destroyed. But I present to you Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 15. And it says, catch us the foxes, the little foxes that spoil the vines, for our vines have tender grapes. When your grapes are tender, when you're at the beginning of a decision and you hadn't quite locked in the way you need to lock in, it's the small compromise, it's the small distractions that pull us off. See, we miss the little things because we're so focused on the big things. And it's the little things that's taking us off. That one little text that you sent to that coworker that seemed to be showing interest in you, or that one little text that you read and accepted and you didn't shut it down, or that one little piece of cake, or that cookie, or that donut. When you said you're going to change the way you eat because you're tired of this medication, you're tired of feeling the way you feel, you're tired of not having energy. And see, what happens is it's the small things because it doesn't seem to be doing anything. But there's a compound effect on small things. Small things lead to big things. I remember reading a book, The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. I tell people about this book all the time because it's a great book. And he presented a question in there. He says, do you want $1 million today, or do you want a penny a day that compounds every day, that doubles every day? And here's the thing. If you take the penny, it's only on day 30 that you realize that that penny turned into 10 million. Now, you took 1 million on the first day, but you missed out on the 10 million because you couldn't just stick with it. But that goes the same principle on the negative. It's the small things that compound into big things. Because typically, if we get away with a small thing, we try it again and we try it again. Next thing you know, we're off in the deep end and wondering how we got here, because we didn't stick with the intention. We didn't stick with the commitment that we made. So it's not always the big things that are throwing us off. It's the little small things that we need to watch out for. These are the small things that are robbing us of life. They're robbing us. Listen, destruction doesn't always come through explosions. It creeps in through small compromises. What are you compromising about your life that is robbing you? Robbing you of your peace, robbing you of your health, robbing you of real joy and happiness. Sometimes happiness is a distraction for people because people are chasing happiness, which is so fleeting. And they miss joy because we get into this selfish mode when it becomes all about what I want, because now options have presented themselves, or the difficulty of the narrow path has showed itself, and I want out of this. I don't like the way this feels. Athletes understand it. Anybody who's achieved great things, they understand the value of discipline, the value of making the decision and sticking with your decision, the integrity that you get from sticking with the decision that you made, from commitment, which is something nobody seems to understand anymore. Commitment. That word seems to be lost on our society today. Well, here's the thing. We talk about the broad way. What is it about this broad way? What does this broad way look like? The broad way looks like expanding what truth is. You have everybody talking about my truth. Listen, if your truth only doesn't extend beyond you, it's not a truth, it's an opinion or a perspective, or rather a perception. But what you lack is perspective. Because if I keep telling myself I'm one thing, but nothing outside of me agrees with that, I got to really check it. The identity and the morality, all of these things are being widened because of things like my truth. Because they're playing with definitions. We look at Romans chapter 1, verse 22 through 25. And it says this: claiming to be wise, they instead became utter fools. And instead of worshiping the glorious, ever-living God, they worship idols made to look like mere people and birds and animals and reptiles. So God abandoned them to do whatever shameful things their hearts desired. As a result, they did vile and degrading things with each other's bodies. They traded the truth about God for a lie. So they worshiped and served the things God created instead of the Creator himself, who is worthy of eternal praise. Amen. Says God, he'll let you have your way, right? You want your way, he'll let you have your way. But when you have your way, we see the results of what happens when people have their way. We end up with this chaotic life that we have. People are playing with definitions. We used to know what a man was and what a woman is. Now there's so much confusion about what's a man and what's a woman. This spectrum that everybody talks about. You got all these different sexualities now. This spectrum, the more choices, it's just inviting chaos into our society. You don't even know how to address a person anymore. You walk up to a person and you can say, sir, ma'am, or something. They will feel the need to correct you. It could start a whole argument, or even worse. But this is what things have become for us. And listen, Proverbs 24:1 says, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. God created and founded this world. He's the only one who has the right to define what a thing is. We need to check with him to really see what something is. We can't put our own definition on. We didn't create it. We're not creators in that sense. God is the only one that creates something out of nothing. Our creation is limited to creating from things that are already here. Those are two different processes. God is the only one that can create something out of nothing. And because he created this world, he's the only one who has the right to define what things are in this world. So we have to check with him to see what a thing should be called. What's one definition you see society changing that concerns you? I want you to drop a comment in the chat. One definition you see society changing that concerns you. It's really concerning to you. Let me know. Now we talk about this narrow path, right? We want the life. We want the freedom. We want freedom. You know, the Bible says, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free, not set. There's a difference between made and different being set. Made is a process. Set isn't a process. It's just a quick change, right? Saul was set as king. He was set. Samuel went to Saul. He saw him. He anointed him. And aesthetically, he looked like the perfect guy. He was head and shoulders above the rest. He looked the part. But he didn't have that character trait that David had. David was anointed when he was a kid, but he wasn't appointed until he was an adult. But in between time, that process was making him. He was being made a king. He was anointed king, but he was being made a king through that process that he went through all those years he was running from Saul. There's a difference. And most of us don't want to be made. We want to be set. He says the truth shall make you free, but we keep playing with the truth. We keep trying to redefine the truth, but we don't have that right. See, we've been taught that narrow, or that difficulty of the narrow path, it's punishment. But it's not punishment, it's protection. God did not give us laws to restrict us. God gave us laws so that we can be free. And that's a hard concept for us to understand, because we don't like law. You talk about law in a church, everybody, oh, you legalistic and all of this. But you look at that church and everybody's lives are a mess. Nobody wants to do what God says, but everybody wants the blessing. They want the freedom. They want the life, but they don't want listen to what leads to life. He says, lock in into what I'm saying. Discipline yourself according to my word, and you will experience life at a level that most people dream about. But we can't do that. We can't lock in because we're too concerned about our little feelings, the discomfort. And so we step off the narrow path onto the broad path because it's more accommodating to us at the time. And then we say, this word doesn't work. God doesn't work. We lie to ourselves in that fashion. When it is, we just didn't listen and do what he said. Point blank, period. Simple as that, cut and dry. We didn't do what he said because we had made up in our own minds how things should be, what things should be, instead of checking with the one who created all things. And so we miss life. Think about the person who discipline themselves in their finances. They start with a budget, they make a budget, and then now they start experiencing the choices. When you don't handle your finances, your choices get limited. The people who discipline themselves financially have all of the options in the world. They can go to a car dealership and say what they want to drive. They don't have to take the thing that the dealer has to magically work to get them to afford. They can live in places that they want to live. They're not restricted to, I just want to get in. If I can just get in a place. The evidence is all around us, but we fail to understand it. We fail to lock into it. That narrow path requires endurance. It requires discomfort. It's part of it, but it also requires obedience. And that's an ugly word in our society, obedience. You got to obey. You know, people jokingly laugh when they're in a marriage ceremony and they get to the wives' vows and it's like to love, honor, cherish, and obey. And then the wife gives a little funny look like, I don't know, we ain't talking. And everybody, ha, 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 that ain't funny. You are basically saying you are resistant to what God has said. Ain't got to obey no man. Listen, the same way that man got to obey God, what is God looking for from you? You know, I know everybody want to compromise what they say because it doesn't feel good. But here's the thing. Like I said before, you didn't look at the person you were choosing to begin with. But that's a whole other thing. I ain't gonna let that trip me up right now. Right? Here's the thing. Discipline is the price we pay for destiny. Convenience is the price we pay for destruction. I say that one more time. Discipline is the price we pay for destiny. Convenience is the price we pay for destruction. We are destroying our own lives because we want convenience. There is nothing convenient about not eating certain foods that you've been grown to love. But it's necessary if I want health. Listen, all appetites are learned. Whatever you got an appetite for, you can retrain it. Let's be honest, you can retrain it. Now, do you want to? That's really the question. Do you want to retrain your habits? You will hang around people eating fat backs of collard greens their whole life, right? Oh, them fat back and collard greens taste so good. Listen, I'm a witness. I'm right there with you. But does it really benefit me? Does it really lead to good health? Does it really lead to a life where I'm not worried about medication and going to the doctor every time I turn around? That's not my portion. And God didn't want that to be our portion. But because we want to do what we want to do, now this is what life is presented to us. And we keep waiting on God to just take it away. Listen, there's a protection that most people are familiar with that comes from shielding. We want God to shield us from the consequences and the effects of life. We want to be shielded, but we don't understand the first mode of protection is instruction. That is the first level of protection, instruction. God didn't shield Adam and Eve. He instructed them. And because they stepped outside of the instruction and they disobeyed him, they invited the chaos in. But the protection was already in the instruction. But we don't like to be instructed. We like to be shielded. Shield me from the bad decisions that's why we come to Jesus. Well, that's why everybody talks about salvation so much. We want to be shielded from the bad things of life. When God is saying, listen to me, that's where the life is. The life is in you listening to me. We gotta watch out for the temptation of the broad path. The broad path is very tempting, very tempting. People broaden definitions to avoid discomfort and discipline. That's simply why. And we get in our feelings about, well, you know, they couldn't do any better. Who says who? Only God has the right to tell us what our capacity is. And if every time I get into a tight, I cry about it instead of stopping trying to figure out, where did this come from? How did I get here? And how can I avoid getting here again? Then we miss a point of growth. We miss a point of maturity. We miss a point of wisdom. So we all become fools when we keep doing our own thing. We all become fools. Listen, God's boundaries aren't barriers. They're bridges to life. God's boundaries aren't barriers. They are bridges to life. If you want life, embrace the boundaries. When he says, don't do, thou shalt not, don't do it. When he says, do this, this is the thing that you need to pay attention to, and this is the thing you need to lock into. Because he designed the house. You ever been over somebody's house and they got house rules? And you say you were playing a card game, playing spades, right? You used to playing spades one way, but you go over this person's house and the person has set up the game to where they define how the winning goes. And you play by the house rules. Well, earth is house rules because God created it. He defined everything. He set it all up. We didn't make it, not any of this. Now, we've created a lot of things based on what he had already put here, but we can't create something out of nothing. I said that before. But God owns the right to set definitions. We don't. So our greatest thing is to lock into what he says. Lock into what he says. That's where life is for us. That's where we need to be. That's where life happens. But we gotta fix our minds. We gotta fix our minds. Listen, the days of redefining righteousness are over. We can't define righteousness. Those days are over. That's his job. God's people must rise and with clarity and courage, lock in to what he says. We got to walk that narrow way. That narrow way. We got to embrace the discipline of God, the discipline of Christ. We got to embrace it and watch how God expands our lives. Watch how God moves in our lives. Watch how the promises of God show up when we let him define our life. When we let him be the determiner of what's good and what's right. This whole world, this whole society could change instantly if we all would lock in. Listen, if you know someone struggling with the narrow path, I want you to share this out to them. Share this with them. Share it with them. And let them hear what you heard today. If you're serious about walking the narrow path, I want you to subscribe. I want you to lock in with us because this is the journey we're on. We want you to be a part of that journey. So subscribe, lock in with us. We're gonna get this thing right. We're gonna make it happen the way God ordained it to happen. Listen, thank you all. I appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. God bless you. We'll see you next week.